Coming up, heat records are set in June, way before summer even begins. And predictions mount about 2023, which could turn out to be the hottest year on record. Does that scare you?
You know, I've been pretty scared about climate change for many, many years.
A climate summit in Bonn, Germany begins in arguments and ends in disappointment, further delaying commitments to get global temperatures in check.
Things are getting very serious very soon, and we are absolutely not prepared for it.
And a new film shines the spotlight on an animal human poachers consider more valuable than gold and diamonds. What do you want people to take away from this film?
I don't think people had any awareness of what these men and women were actually doing out in the field. I'm Jurko, and I'm the lead producer and director of Rhino Man the movie. I'm hoping our work can highlight the plight of this endangered species and the dangerous job rangers commit to keep the animals protected. You're watching Just 2 Degrees on TRT World.
A climate disaster in Brazil left 13 people dead in the state of Rio Grande do Sul in mid-June. Dozens of towns in the state were affected. Roads turned to rivers as becoming the new normal. The minute any rain falls, one resident of Cará, one of the hardest hit towns, said water came up to their waist inside the house. That person's family was rescued by firemen on boats, others were evacuated by helicopter. The torrential rain and the strong winds damaged thousands of homes, left more than 85,000 people without power. The climate crisis has amplified weather disasters in Brazil like it has in many other countries.
Nunca tivemos uma situação dessa, tá? Chegamos em 2011 a ter uma situação com 173 milímetros, né, na quinta-feira. Então foi algo atípico. Eu com 48 anos de vida e 34 anos de trabalho nunca presenciei uma situação como essa.
Meanwhile, it's turning out to be a very hot summer in the Northern Hemisphere, and global average temperatures spiked to their highest levels in decades for the month of June. Meteorologists say there are two main factors pushing up the mercury: continued greenhouse gas emissions by humans and the return of the climate pattern known as El Niño. That's going to set the stage for more than a year of unusual worldwide warming, including heat waves, droughts, wildfires, and hurricanes. We've already seen the impacts, including massive wildfires in Canada, heat waves in Siberia, and in record lows for sea ice around Antarctica. We've got NASA climate scientist Peter Kalmus with us on Just 2 Degrees to talk about this. Hi, Peter. It's good seeing you.
Hi, thanks. Yeah, I need to say I'm speaking on my own behalf.
Got you. All right, so summer, I think, began around June 20th in the Northern Hemisphere, but we saw heat records being set before that. Does that scare you?
You know, I've been pretty scared about climate change for many, many years. There's a trend of global temperatures rising, just as you said in the intro, from greenhouse gas emissions just continuing to increase, world leaders continuing to expand fossil fuel industry, which is the cause of all of this heating. So it's no surprise. And as you said, it does appear that we are likely heading into the El Nino part of the El Nino Southern Oscillation phase, and that could cause even higher temperatures this year. It was only a matter of time. It could be devastating for coral reefs around the world. It could be devastating for the Amazon rainforest. Has a lot of complex effects around the world.
You know, there's a really sad irony, even for climate activists, during a hot summer, unusually hot summer. We have to be using more fossil fuels through our air conditioning units, both at home and in our cars, possibly even buying more plastic refreshments. Cold refreshments like, well, I won't call names, but refreshments using plastic bottles. I mean, this irony is frustrating, isn't it?
Yeah, well, it just shows, to me at least, adaptation is really not a viable alternative to mitigation. You know, eventually adding more air conditioning around the world is simply unsustainable. Air conditioners are subject to blackouts when things get especially bad. And as heat waves continue to get worse and worse around the world, that could lead to very high mortality, extreme heat events, which is actually one of my main concerns going forward.
Yeah, Peter, let's look at what happened last year and years before. Large numbers of wildfires, prolonged droughts, some of the most powerful storms we've ever seen. I mean, hurricanes in the Atlantic, I read, were forming this year earlier than usual. Do you have any predictions for 2023? I'm afraid to hear your answer.
Well, so again, everyone needs to understand that this is a trend. So El Nino, La Nino aside, right? So those sloshings of energy within the climate system can make for a particularly hot year or a somewhat cooler year. But the really important thing to remember is that we have a trend of increasing global heat caused by burning fossil fuels, caused by the global fossil fuel industry blocking action, lying for decades. That is the bottom line. Now, what I predict to happen as that trend in global heating continues to intensify is basically all of the impacts that we've already started to see over recent years, just getting more intense, getting more frequent. So the wildfires we started to see in Canada, I think this could be a very bad wildfire year. Heat waves getting worse, and then eventually follow-on impacts that we maybe haven't really seen that much yet, like global shocks to the global food system, which also really concerns me.
Peter, not a fun conversation at all, very scary actually. Thank you so much for your time and appearing on Just 2 Degrees. Appreciate it.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, everyone become climate activists, please.
Thanks for adding that. All right, so the world's two biggest greenhouse gas emitters must partner to tackle the climate issues we're all suffering. That's according to the US climate envoy, John Kerry. He's hoping to represent his country on a trip to China. The two countries don't see eye to eye on many issues, but there seems to be consensus on the environmental crisis. Kerry wants ongoing issues between Washington and Beijing to take a back seat to the global warming challenge.
No, there's no conditionality with respect to we're talking about the things we very much hope China will be able to do, and together with us, we have to create a partnership here. China and the United States are the two largest emitters in the world. We're now moving, thanks to President Biden, in a very significant way. He has signed historic legislation into effect. It's having an impact already.
In Germany, the Bonn Climate Change Conference took place over 10 days at the start of June. But the head of the United Nations climate body says he was not at all satisfied with the outcome. Big surprise. Simon Steele says the process during the talks was too slow, considering the urgency of the issues we're facing. No decisions were made on how countries will fund their climate action policies and on the global stocktake, which is designed to assess the response to the climate crisis every 5 years. I spoke with Max Weiss. He's an environmental engineer who attended the Bonn Climate Summit. There were reportedly lots of arguments in Bonn for days before the summit even began, fights about climate funding and carbon cuts. One Pakistani diplomat described what he saw as a class of primary school. What's your take on why climate summits, more often than not, fail to come up with solid, implementable plans to tackle global warming?
Right. So I was following the agricultural negotiations in Bonn, and the short answer is simply too many conflicts of interest, I would say. And the most problematic part is that, from my feeling or from my experience also, I think for some actors there, the negotiations failing is actually the best possible outcome, because they simply don't want change. For example, agricultural giants, they are massively profiting off this current very destructive food system we have, and nothing needs to change for them at the moment. Everything is going great. They're reaping in huge profits, and so any change is never change a winning system.
Let's talk about that a bit more. Like, a lot of attention is placed on phasing out coal, oil and gas, and with good reason. They account for over 75% of all global greenhouse gas emissions and nearly 90% of all carbon dioxide emissions. That's according to the UN. There's a lot less discussion about the impacts of animal agriculture. Why do you think that is?
Right. I think it comes down to 2 points. First of all, I would say is a lack of awareness, a lack of knowledge about the true impacts of animal farming, animal agriculture on the planet. I think what we are culpable of in climate discussions oftentimes is a carbon tunnel vision. So we're only thinking about carbon emissions. We're not even talking that much about methane. In our current emergency situation, cutting methane is the best thing we can do to achieve cooling effects in our atmosphere. And animal agriculture is, depending on which study you're looking at, is either number 1 or number 2 cause for methane, human-made methane emissions. So phasing out animal agriculture in everywhere where it's possible, basically, is a survival imperative at the moment. And we really have to see animals as very resource-intensive factors in our food system. If we look at land use, for example, more than 80% of agricultural land is used for animal production, but it provides us with only 18% of calories. So this is a massive inefficiency we have. And if we simply think about the scale of this, so we are using 80 billion highly inefficient bioreactors, because that's what animals really are on a biophysical level. So we're using them, and we need massive inputs in form of land, water, fertilizer, and then we have these very harmful co-products on a massive scale, like greenhouse gases, methane, manure. So there's a lot of lack of awareness. There's a huge lack of awareness about this. And then there's also human discrimination of non-human animals. If you want to educate yourself about the environmental impacts of our food system, then obviously you're going to come across the fate of these individual animals that are ending up in this machinery. And it hurts to look. It's not very pleasant. And like everywhere else, like in our whole society, it's a massive blind spot, like this moral dilemma of killing billions and billions of sentient beings on a yearly basis just for food. And yeah, the same thing goes for the climate debate. So it's a massive blind spot there as well.
You know, Max, we're hearing of record heat already in places like Mexico, the UK, China, and possibly that 2023 will be the hottest year on record. What are your predictions for the year, not just in the global north, but the south too?
Honest answer is, I think it looks pretty grim, unfortunately. So we see these very worrying trends all over the planet, from Antarctica to northern Atlantic. So right now, the ice in Antarctica is still melting, even though it's almost deep winter. Then we have these temperature explosions all over the planet regarding the surface temperature of our oceans. And there's a high probability there will be a very, very strong El Nino, possibly the strongest ever recorded, towards the end of the year developing. And this means very extreme weather on both sides of the Pacific, but it can also impact the greater global weather system. And I think this is what's going to happen. I think this year will be very bad, but next year will be even worse, unfortunately. And yeah, I see very big problems coming, especially in terms of food security. I think our food system is just 1 or 2 droughts in the global north away. And yeah, I think it's a hard pill to swallow, but I think we have to talk about that. Things are getting very serious very soon, and we are absolutely not prepared for it.
A new film is looking to heighten awareness of endangered rhinoceros species and shine a spotlight on the brave rangers who protect them from poachers. A rhino's horn is its most defining characteristic and used by the animal to defend its territory. But for centuries, humans have hunted the otherwise peaceful herbivores almost to extinction. The horns are sold on the black market. Reports this year put the price of a rhino horn at $60,000 per pound, making it more valuable than gold and diamonds.
Just to get the message that a rhino was shot somewhere, it brings us the feeling that it's like we have lost one of our own family members. This is the reason why we miss our family. We stay long periods out living in uncomfortable conditions. It's because we are protecting these things. It's just some kind of a compact here. There's no magic here. It's very painful to see how cruel people are to kill such a big animal only for this party.
So we connected with the director of Rhino Man, the movie, about the film and his inspirations. What do you want people to take away from this film?
That's a really great question. I think when this film was started, there weren't really too many people talking about rangers at that time. And I don't think people had any awareness of what these men and women were actually doing out in the field while they were maybe going on game drives or staying at lodges. But I think we really want to have that impact of saying, hey, these people are out there protecting the wildlife that you care about, the land that you care about, and they're doing it with, in a lot of cases, little reward and a lot of danger to their own lives. And so we hope that people are inspired by their stories, because these rangers are some of the most passionate people I've ever met, and they're very dedicated to the work they're doing. And many of them believe it's a calling and something that's a bigger purpose that they're connected to. And so, connecting with that spirit, I think it'll hopefully inspire people to want to advocate for them, talk about them, and hopefully support them in other ways as well, directly.
Why do people, John, have to put their lives on the line to protect these animals? Who are the major drivers of the rhino horn industry?
Yeah, so it's a little bit different in every part of the world, but in South Africa specifically, one of the biggest drivers of poaching and illegal wildlife trade is the rhino horn trade. And it's mostly driven by syndicates that are based out of Asia, China, Vietnam are kind of the biggest drivers. And originally it was more traditional medicine. So people, were using rhino horn for different types of medicine. Some of it was like headache relief and other things. But over time, it's become more of a status symbol. And some people are using it as a hangover cure, or, carving it into art that they can almost use as an investment. And so this has really driven up the demand for rhino horn over the years, especially since 2008 is when this really took off in South Africa, and it kind of peaked in 2014 with over 1,000 rhinos being killed per year. And that demand has created a situation where people living near these protected areas, in many cases, don't have a lot of opportunities for income anyways. So they're, desperate for ways to help their families or pay the bills. And sometimes they get drug into these crime syndicates who are kind of preying on these people to use them for information or to actually go out there and poach these animals. So the rangers out there have had to face this, originally it was more poaching for subsistence, where people were going out there hunting for, meat for their families and food. But because of this increased demand for rhino horn, now a lot of these poachers are armed with, very powerful weapons. Some of them are highly trained, ex-military. And so over the years, they've really had to change their tactics to face this threat that is, above and beyond what they ever set out to originally do.
Yeah, clearly there are major risks. Tell us about Anton Mzimba. I believe he was a friend of yours.
Yeah, so I met Anton through the making of this film, and just to be honest, I came into this whole world as a filmmaker. I wasn't really didn't have a background in conservation. I always loved the outdoors. I grew up in nature in Northeast Ohio and spent a lot of time outside with wildlife. But when I came to this film, it was really about the stories, and what attracted me to it were kind of like I was saying, the passion of the people involved, and so many people focused on this higher cause and doing something that's not only helpful to themselves and their community, but hopefully the greater world. And so Anton I met on my first trip to South Africa in 2018 while working on this film. We were trying to flesh out the storyline a little more, and he was one of the main characters we were focusing on.
It's not nice to be a field ranger. You need someone who has a passion of being field ranger. It's not something that you become a field ranger overnight. It's something that has to do with a call from God that you must save the wildlife. You're not there to suit your own interest. But it's been getting harder to find good rangers. We need strong men and women with the right motivations if we are going to have a chance to save the wildlife.
What struck me about him immediately, he was just one of the most generous and caring people I've ever met. He's proud and doing his work, but at the same time, he's just an open heart, and he's so generous with information and wanting to bring you into the world that he so dearly loves. And on top of that, he's willing to stand in front of a rhino to protect it and do his duty. So just a super inspiring guy that over the last 5 years, I really became close to through this project and spent a lot of time with.
It's amazing. I'm curious about what condition rhino figures would be in if there weren't ranchers like Anton around to protect them.
Yeah, I mean, like I was saying, in 2014, I think there were about 1,200 rhinos that were poached in that 1 year. And currently there's 27,000 rhinos left in the world completely, and that's spread across 5 species. In South Africa, there's the white rhino. I think there's about 16,000 of those left in the world, and black rhinos, which are about 6,000 left. And so with the rates that these animals are being poached and with the demand for horns still being high, if there was no one there to stand in the line of fire to protect these rhinos, then I mean, it could be a matter of years before they be completely decimated. And the sad thing is, you hear a lot of stories from people that have gone over to Asia and have gone undercover and talked to some of these people selling the horn. To them, they're like, the faster that the rhinos are decimated, the higher the price I'll be able to fetch for my horn, which is a really sad story to hear.
Are you kidding?
So, yeah. So it's without the rangers there, kind of think of them as the final line of defense against poachers and other things that are trying to encroach on the wildlife and protected areas. But I think something we could talk about too is Anton really inspired our organization, Global Conservation Corps, to look at the bigger picture and how we could hopefully change the culture and future from outside of the fence and make this so that they don't have to be standing there facing such terrible threats.
Yeah, talk about people. After we see the film, how can people contribute? Because I'm sure people would want to.
Yeah, so we've been working on a social impact campaign over the last few years and developing that with several partners. And I think the original dream was creating screenings for people living near protected areas, because as I mentioned, a lot of these folks are disconnected from these areas because of the lack of opportunity and income. And traditionally, a lot of these places were more for the rich and wealthy. And a lot of that's changing, and people are doing a lot of good things to open this up so that local people can experience it and be more involved and have to. Otherwise, long term, we're just fighting a losing battle. So, we wanted to create screenings for local people so that they could be inspired by the heroes that these rangers are on the inside and see what the work they're doing, and hopefully aspire to be not only rangers, but people that care about conservation and what they're fighting for. So that was the original thing. And then with our partners, the Timavati Private Nature Reserve, Southern African Wildlife College, Thin Green Line Foundation, we're creating a way for people to be able to donate and support the future generation of rangers through training, through inspiring the youth through our organization, Global Conservation Corps, to be more involved with and care about conservation, and also taking care of fallen rangers that have had similar fates to Anton's.
And that's how we end this episode of Just 2 Degrees. Before we leave you, conservation efforts in Turkey have worked well to increase sea turtle numbers in the Mediterranean. According to the Sea Turtle Research, Rescue and Rehabilitation Center, there's been a 15% increase in the turtle population in the country and region. We hope to see you next time. Bye.